Welcome to a special edition of the Politically Georgia podcast from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I'm Greg Bluestein, just outside the Derek Dooley campaign watch party. Patricia Murphy is with us. She was also at the Derek Dooley campaign watch party. And Tia Mitchell is here from the Mike Collins campaign headquarters all the way in Jackson. And guys, what a night. Let's start with the Senate race. Tia, you were front and center with Mike Collins. He must be pretty happy coming in around 40% of the vote.
Yeah, he was happy. I think, he was the front runner from the start. He led in every poll. And then tonight, he got the most votes. It was never much of a question whether Mike Collins would make it to the runoff. The question for most of the night was, would it be Derek Dooley or Buddy Carter, who was his opponent in the runoff? So, Mike Collins had a good night. It was a pretty early night for him as far as, again, him knowing that he was moving on.
Yeah. Patricia, there was like a stir that went through the Derek Dooley campaign party when we learned that Buddy Carter was conceding it. This was before any of the national networks called the race. It was Buddy Carter who delivered his concession.
Obviously very disappointed. The votes just weren't there, but I really, there's just, being a person of faith and just having the opportunity that God has given me to serve in the capacity that I've served in as mayor, state rep, state senator, and in Congress has really been just an outstanding opportunity for me.
Yeah, so as you said, Buddy Carter went ahead and called Derek Dooley kind of well before this race was called, but that just let this immense sigh of relief go in the Derek Dooley campaign headquarters. That gave him the green light to go up on stage and say that he had punched his ticket to the runoff. He was so clearly relieved about that. He's never run a race. He's never given a victory speech. He's never given a concession speech. So he was a little nervous earlier in the night. He said, I'll just be glad when we have the results and know that we've won. It was interesting on stage. He thanked Buddy Carter really for the race he ran. He said he's a good man and a self-made man. And then he said a vote for Mike Collins is a vote for Jon Ossoff because Mike Collins cannot win this race in November. So he very quickly pivoted to running against both Mike Collins and hopefully Jon Ossoff in the future.
And he framed this race. He framed his runoff spot. I couldn't say victory, but his second place finish in the primary as basically him being the comeback kid.
For months, they counted us out. They said that Mike Collins had this race in the bag. He's so far ahead, nobody could catch him. Well, let me tell you something, guys. We proved him dead wrong tonight, and we got all the momentum heading to the thing.
Heading to the thing. So now we've got a runoff in June with a clear, distinct contrast between the two candidates, right? I mean, if this was a Mike Collins versus Buddy Carter runoff, you'd have two incumbent congressmen who both were trying to basically be the MAGA warriors, both trying to get Trump's endorsement. And of course, both Derek Dooley and Mike Collins will still definitely try to get Trump's endorsement. But now you've got much more of a distinct campaign because you've got the incumbent Congress member who is running on a record of being a Trump loyalist against someone who basically says that only an outsider can beat Jon Ossoff. So there is a very, very interesting contrast going there. It's going to make it much more easy for us to tell the story, and I think much easier for voters to pick sides.
Yeah, I think also Governor Kemp is going to continue to be a huge factor in this race. It was very clear early on that so much of Dooley's support, even his viability, was because Kemp had become such a huge booster, basically brought him into the race, physically campaigned with him all over the state. His PAC spent more than $1 million on behalf of Derek Dooley. All of that's going to continue in the runoff. And Kemp is Dooley's biggest booster and makes the point that Republicans, in order to win in November, have to pick somebody like Dooley. Kemp will go into several examples around the country where an outsider message well outperforms somebody who's a sitting member of Congress. And Congress's approval ratings right now are in the absolute basement. So, I think there's something to that. We also hear a lot of appetite from voters kind of looking for somebody who's not a part of the system. And that will certainly be the message from the Dooley campaign for the next 4 weeks.
Now, Mike Collins, he's been the front runner from the get-go, right? He landed around 40% of the vote, so it's not within striking distance of a of an outright victory, but pretty damn close. He's going to cast himself as something of an underdog as well. Let's listen to him.
When you hear people talk about how much money Jon Ossoff has, remind them of the results tonight, that the winning campaign did the most with the least. We were outspent 15-1, outmatched, but I tell you what, not outworked.
So again, now we've got a very different sort of campaign. This was the campaign, this was the runoff that Mike Collins' campaign team says they wanted, right? They were more worried about running against someone like Buddy Carter, who could self-fund, who spent millions of dollars of his own cash into the race. And frankly, right, they now have to contend with someone who is more of a wild card, who is definitely an outsider, who is such an outsider he himself acknowledges he hardly voted before 2020. He's someone who, without Brian Kemp's support, we wouldn't probably be talking about it all right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's easy to say. We wouldn't be talking about that. It's not that Dooley couldn't have spent years in the trenches, as most candidates have to. But in order to pop up from being a virtual unknown to now being in this Senate runoff, absolutely, that's the Kemp factor right there. I think we had wondered how much would that Kemp endorsement mean. It wasn't just the Kemp endorsement. Again, it was just the kind of blood, sweat, and tears that Kemp has put into this campaign. It almost made you feel like he kind of is going to miss campaigning. He is out there so much, but just really didn't leave anything on the field when it comes to what he didn't do for Dooley. He did everything for Dooley. It helped a lot, but then also Dooley grew quite a bit as a campaigner and a candidate. So I think he helped himself out a lot as well, and I think he will give Mike Collins a run for his money, but it does feel like Collins is the front runner right now.
Yeah, it's interesting looking at their performance around the state. His buddy Carter dominated the southeast part of the state. That's not a surprise. He focused a lot of his campaign attention and ads on his coastal Georgia territory. That's where he's known the best, down in the 1st District. Mike Collins, he wins a huge swath of rural Georgia from his home base up in the northeast Georgia part of the state all the way through the fall line, rural parts of Georgia, where the MAGA strain probably is the strongest, but where Derek Dooley did the best, the heart of Metro Atlanta, really the sort of Democratic-leaning territories. You look at the map, he dominated Athens for obvious reasons. The Dooley name is a household name throughout Georgia, but really in Athens, but also DeKalb County, Fulton County, Cobb County, the sort of cornerstones of the Democratic coalition, and some of the exurbs around Atlanta as well. He did very well. And now let's talk about Jon Ossoff, who's just sitting there waiting for whoever emerges. He's not said much at all about any of these three, kind of branding them all as puppets of Donald Trump. He's clearly making this race a referendum of the president.
Yeah, and we didn't hear anything from Jon Ossoff today. He was really laying low, and I think he has been just sitting back and letting these Republicans kind of go after each other. That certainly was the case between Collins and Carter. Now, it will most definitely be the case between Dooley and Collins. We already saw those sharper elbows come out today. And so I think Ossoff is just going to let this play out, let them spend their money against each other, let them beat up on each other. And even the mood among all these Republican campaigns is, first things first, we have to get through this. But they know Ossoff is going to be really, really tough to beat. It's a tough year right now for Republicans, the way it's shaping up. The turnout for Republicans was not as strong in Georgia this year so far in the primary. And Ossoff himself has just proven to be a really strategic and effective campaigner so far.
Well, Patricia, let's take a very quick break because there's so much more to tackle, including the surprising results in the Georgia governor's race. This is Politically Georgia from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Welcome back to Politically Georgia. It's Greg Bluestein with Tia Mitchell and Patricia Murphy. Tia's over at the Mike Collins campaign headquarters where there can be some spotty Wi-Fi in Jackson. And Patricia and I just met up at the Battery where both Rick Jackson and Derek Dooley were holding their campaign parties. Also, Chris Carr was here too. It was like 3 of the top Republican candidates were all here. And we're about to talk about that other side of the race. A reminder though, if you have a question you'd like to ask us here on Politically Georgia, you can call the hotline anytime, day or night, bother Shaney B. We're taping this at midnight, so he's still awake, I promise. We'll play it back and answer the question right here on the show, doing our Monday mailbag segment. The number is 770-810-5297. That's 770-810-5297. So politically, Georgia at ajc.com. All one word. We can't wait to hear from you. Let's talk governor's race, because the Republican side went mostly as expected. The Democratic side, though, is, I think, the even bigger headline. We're going to tackle both, but oh my gosh, the Democratic primary for governor. We always thought Keisha Lance Bottoms had an outside shot of winning this race outright. I didn't realize how dominant this really would be. I'm looking at the map for her performance. This is with not all the precincts reporting, but almost all, 92%. She's at 56%. So the undecideds clearly broke her way. Jason Estévez is in a distant second at 19%. But obviously, Mayor Bottoms, she ends up winning the outright victory. She wins the nomination. And it looks like she won not all Georgia's 159 counties, but almost all of them, with not all the returns in. I mean, even Athens, which is Michael Thurman's sort of home base, that's his backyard, she doesn't have a majority, but she's at 40% in Athens compared to 34% for Michael Thurman. All over Metro Atlanta, the area where she's known best, she's at 48 in Fulton. She's at 43 in DeKalb County. That's Thurman's other home base. He's only at 20% there. I mean, this map is basically full of Keisha Lance Bottoms counties, which just shows you, Patricia, how much the undecideds and the base of the party broke decisively for the former mayor in the final weeks of the race.
Yeah, the big parlor game in Georgia politics was who would get into this runoff with Keisha Lance Bottoms. Would it be Jason Estévez? Would it be Michael Thurman? Would it even possibly be Jeff Duncan, who really has seemed to fade in the last month or so of this campaign? And then nobody even got close. And I think that tells us a lot about Keisha Lance Bottoms. First, that she has been underestimated. Second, that nobody ran against her. I mean, they all ran their own campaigns, but nobody ran a single attack ad against Keisha Lance Bottoms. They did have kind of occasional kind of taking her on directly in forums and debates, but nobody really mounted a significant campaign to exploit Keisha Lance Bottoms' vulnerabilities, particularly her time as Atlanta mayor. That era is certainly over. I think now she's going to be turning the page to a whole new situation with obviously a different crop of opponents, but a totally different tone that she's, I think, going to have to prepare for. However, she just comes blazing out of this Democratic primary, and I think also makes herself look a lot stronger for November because she does have such universal support among Democrats. It makes it look like Democrats have already coalesced. And it shouldn't be hard to get the rest of them on board when they're choosing between Keisha Lance Bottoms and one of the Republicans running against her. So she's had an incredibly good night. But I do think that the other Democrats gave her a huge wide open lane to cruise to the top, and she more than took advantage of that.
Yeah, they can Monday morning or Wednesday morning quarterback why they didn't go after her more aggressively earlier on. You can also see the reasons why. I mean, Jeff Duncan was concerned about going after her more because it would open him to attacks, right? There's different reasons, but they all kind of figured they'd run in their own lanes and carve up their own support, depriving Mayor Bottoms of that majority vote. But in the end, I mean, it's not even close, right? She can declare that she has essentially a Democratic mandate to be the nominee for governor, and she can take advantage of this 4-week period by consolidating even more support and letting Republicans kind of rip each other apart. I want to get to the Republican side of the race in a second, but let's look at Estévez at 19%, Michael Thurman at 13%. That's kind of where the polls always showed him at. Jeff Duncan, 7%. He was never able to gain traction, never able to convince the core of the Democratic base that as a former Republican, that they could trust him, or at least wasn't able to woo voters away from other candidates. And I don't know what that future is for any of those three candidates. I know Michael Thurman, his lifelong dream was to run for governor, and he's gotten to achieve that. But Jason Estévez, Jeff Duncan, still young, could still end up playing roles in Democratic politics in the future, certainly for Jason Estévez.
Yeah, for sure. And Estévez certainly was, you felt him surging and, in a way. He certainly was on the upswing at the end of this campaign cycle, but he just never was able to raise the amount of money he needed to really start to get his name out there. It was clear that Bottoms had a massive name ID all around the state, particularly from being on a whole lot of national cable news, a Biden administration official. She was endorsed by Joe Biden in the closing days of the campaign as well. So she really exploited that. None of these candidates, including Bottoms, raised a whole bunch of money. This will now become much easier for Bottoms. National money is going to start to flood into this race because I think national Democrats see Georgia as very winnable in a year that Republicans feel like the headwinds are coming in against them.
Now let's talk about the duality of the Republican race for governor, because Burt Jones comes in as the overwhelming first place finisher, 38% of the vote, 350 plus thousand votes with 85% counted. So by the time you hear this, there'll be even more. Rick Jackson comes in second place, 33% of the vote. It might, fluctuate a little bit, but Burt Jones has a solid lead over Rick Jackson. So on one hand, Tia, Burt Jones will say, oh my gosh, I had $100 million dumped on me and I still got to 38%. On the other hand, and by the way, Rick Jackson spent, almost that much and got into second place. On the other hand, Rick Jackson could say, I came from zero. Yeah, I spent a lot of money, but I carved my way into a 33%, second place finish and a guaranteed runoff spot where I'm going to spend even more money and show you who's boss.
Yeah, because Rick Jackson can also say, how many months had Burt Jones been running, without any clear challenger. And then here comes Rick Jackson pretty late in the game and was able to, like you said, come late in the game and go from zero to the runoff. And the other thing that Burt Jones might not admit it, but could scare the bejesus out of him, is that it's almost like Rick Jackson has unlimited funds to spend. When you're a billionaire with a B, he spent $83 million to get to the runoff. In his mind, he can spend another $83 million. I mean, I'm sure he doesn't necessarily want to, but he has the capacity to throw a lot of money at this race.
Yeah, and he told Patricia and me at one of his campaign stops on Monday, essentially he's ready to do that he views this not as his money but God's money, and he feels like this is the best way to spend it. Patricia, both Burt Jones and Rick Jackson gave us a very much of a preview of the race ahead in their speeches. I don't even know if I call them victory. I guess they're runoff speeches. Let's hear from Rick Jackson.
This weekend, my opponent said he was going to win without a runoff. Well, no surprise, Burt was all talk and no results. And I have news for Burt. He isn't going to win the runoff either.
And Burt Jones gave his own rejoinder down in Jackson.
But I'm so proud of Georgia voters for realizing that Hollywood production over there is nothing like the genuine article that you have right here. I'm the workhorse.
You do get the sense that A, this is going to be a brutal runoff, but B, that both of them kind of got, I don't want to say iron sharpens iron, I don't know how to put it, but Burt Jones certainly strengthened himself as a candidate by having to face someone like Rick Jackson.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that process is going to continue. We are going to see exactly what we've seen so far, deeply personal ads, tens of millions of dollars. But I think it will be all of that and much more. I think it's also really important to step back from this race and the results and look at what a huge role money has played in this GOP primary. Somebody like Chris Carr, it sort of shows like if you're not able to raise the money and a lot of it, in fact, it would be ideal if you come in with a personal net worth of more than $100 million. It feels like that's what this GOP race is telling us. You've got to have money, and you got to have tons of money, or else you're not going to be competitive in a year like this. Second of all, I think that a big part of Jackson's success is the fact that he has not been a part of politics. He's got that same outsider message as Derek Dooley, and there is a very palpable appetite for that among the GOP base, maybe statewide among lots of people. We have to see sort of how they test that with other voters. But it's sort of that outsider appeal has crossed over into both of these, the Senate and the governor's race, and I think it's a big part in why we've got two of these candidates right now.
Tia, the more mainstream candidates, they get sidelined, right? Brad Raffensperger, 15%, Chris Carr barely cracking double digits, shows you also where the Republican electorate is going in Georgia.
Yeah, you can almost argue that Chris Carr could never figure out a lane as like a Republican of a bygone era, a Johnny Isakson Republican. Could you imagine if Johnny Isakson was still here with us? Where would he land in the modern Republican Party? Someone who literally embraced John Lewis on the House floor. Where is that type of Republican just is not successful in primaries these days? And not that Chris Carr was a Johnny Isakson, but the fact that he was in the vein of Johnny Isakson was his political mentor. Raffensperger, as a perceived independent-minded, I will stand up to Trump Republican, those types of Republicans have not been successful this cycle. I mean, we're in Kentucky, Thomas Massey got taken out. Quite frankly, if Marjorie Taylor Greene had decided to stick it out and stay on the ballot, she probably would have been taken out this primary night too. It would have been tough for her. So, and they by no means are, what we would call the Republicans of yesterday, but there's just no tolerance in the primary for anything other than a Trump, America First, MAGA Republican, it seems like. And we've seen that play out, I think, in the GOP primaries tonight.
In a major way. Let's talk about the other big race, or there's lots to talk about, but we can't get to all of it in this episode, but certainly let's talk about the Georgia Supreme Court races, because those were looked at as big proxy fights over the partisanship of the judiciary. There's a lot of folks who were worried that judiciary was becoming more politicized, and of course there was Democrats who went all in behind Jen Jordan and Miracle Rankin, who felt like this was the last line of defense against so many measures they felt like were getting railroaded through by Republicans. Well, this was fascinating because Justice Warren gets 59% of the vote, so easy victory over Jen Jordan. I mean, clear victory called very early in the night by the Associated Press. But in the other race, this was Miracle Rankin against Justice Charlie Bethel. As of this taping, Bethel has a lead, but it has not been called by the Nationals. It might be have called by the time you guys hear this, but either way, it is much closer than the Warren Jordan race. And I kind of put it on Twitter, like, any explanations why? And a lot of smart people had a lot of varying explanations. But it looks like at least, one and possibly both of these justices could ward off really tough challenges, Patricia.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I'm fascinated by the fact that they have not performed evenly. The two Democrats basically ran as a ticket. They even shared a screen in their TV ads, and however, they're coming out with really different results. We don't know how Charlie Bethel's going to do. Right now, it looks like he's positioned to win, but we'll know more as the results come in, whether or not Charlie Bethel is going to pull this race out. Sarah Warren, I will say, has been very, very active on social media. She has run ads. She has raised a significant amount of money, including from help from the governor. And I don't think she slept on this race. This was not going to come as a surprise to her. And she responded in kind. But I also feel like we'll have to unpack it. We'll have to kind of dig in more. Was it the power of incumbency? Is it the fact that there's an I by their name? Is it because they're nonpartisan races and they're already judges? I don't know. I'm fascinated in this. I think we need to know more to figure out exactly what happened there.
And Tia, before we conclude, let's talk about some of these House races. There's 5 House races, so 6 really, that we were really closely watching. Jim Kingston, the Trump-endorsed son of the former Congressman Jack Kingston, he's ahead in the 1st district. We've also got the race for the 10th district, where Houston Gaines, another Trump-endorsed candidate, easily beats Ryan Millsap in the,
the 9th district.
Yes.
Andrew Clyde easily won his primary, which was kind of in question because Gainesville Mayor Sam Covillain was challenging him in the primary, talked about dissatisfaction with Andrew Clyde and that he wasn't being responsive enough in the district. But Clyde had President Trump's endorsement, and I think that helped insulate him from some of those criticisms, and he easily won that primary.
And in the 11th district, which was the only open U.S. House seat that was Republican held that Trump didn't endorse in, John Cowan, the neurosurgeon who was the runner-up to Marjorie Taylor Greene in the neighboring district way back in 2020, he comes in first place with about 43% of the vote. It's not right now clear who he's going to face, but it looks like it could be Rob Adkerson. That was Barry Loudermilk, the incumbent's top aide. So very interesting race there. But Tia, I want to ask you about the 13th district. That's the race you've been watching very closely. You always said, don't sleep on Heavenly Kimes. She did not win that race, the reality star. Jasmine Clark, the
state rep.
The scientist, the state rep and scientist, she gets 56% of the vote, easily wins. But Heavenly Kimes comes in second ahead of Everton Blair, ahead of others.
Yeah. I told you guys that, Heavenly, her celebrity, her name recognition, her huge billboards, again, she was able to harness that celebrity reality TV factor into a second place finish. But I think we should talk about Jasmine Clark. She not only was a state representative in Gwinnett, so a lot of the district overlapped, so she was naturally kind of suited to the district, but she had a lot of money behind her. There was crypto money, millions of dollars in crypto-related money backing her campaign. She also had another PAC that was supporting scientists, getting more scientists elected that spent money on her behalf. And she really was able to use that to, like you said, win outright without a runoff. Everton Blair was kind of a distant third. But I knew those three were always going to be the top three. But I think the fact that Jasmine Clark was able to win without a runoff, and, of course, the factor being David Scott passed. He was on the ballot because he passed about a month ago. This would have been a very different race, even if David Scott were still around to earn votes.
Well, there is so much more that we need to break down in the coming days and weeks, and of course, up until the June runoff, because we're into phase 2 of this whole thing. We got a long ways to go. That's going to do it for today's edition of Politically Georgia. If you enjoy what you heard, please follow, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform, and share Politically Georgia with a friend. It really helps others find our show and join our conversation. We're going to talk to you next time on the Politically Georgia podcast from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution.
Thanks for listening to the Politically Georgia podcast. Our executive producer is Shane Backler. AJC's head of audio is Sam Stamler. Production support from our partners at Goat Rodeo, including Kara Schillen, Hazel Hoffman, and Max Johnston. For more of our political coverage, visit ajc.com/politicallygeorgia, and we invite you to support local journalism by subscribing to the AJC. Join us again next time on Politically Georgia from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution.